Welcome to Leading Ideas, the program that explores leadership, leaders, their behaviors, their values, and their place in our society. My name is Skip Everitt, and I'm your host for Leading Ideas. This is a time of travel for us this summer, and I just finished up a great trip to, among other places, Pebble Beach for the U.S. Open Golf Tournament, a Disney cruise with my granddaughter, and finished the trip in Salt Lake City, which is emerging, particularly since the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, as one of America's great cities. It's beginning to make those lists that we all know about the best city to, and fill in the blank, the best city to bike to work, the best city to have a home garden, the best city to have a sustainable environment. I had the fortune and opportunity to meet with its first-term mayor, Ralph Becker, who is in his third year as mayor of Salt Lake City and has made tremendous strides in bringing this city into the modern era and following up on the momentum caused by the Winter Olympics several years ago. What I wanted to share with you today are the questions that I asked him. And by the way, this was to be a 15-minute interview, and 45 minutes later we were still talking and had many other things to talk about. He was very gracious, and I want to thank Mayor Becker for that very much. And here's exactly what we talked about, and this was my list of things for Mayor Ralph Becker. I said, number one, you were elected mayor just as the national economy was beginning to implode. How did you lead the city through this difficult time? He's a very modest guy, and what he said is, I didn't. The city was teed up to make it through this tough times, both through its previous mayors and administration, through the support of the state, and through what Ralph called fortunate geography. And I love his terminology. He is a professor and academic in the planning department at the University of Utah, as well as mayor of the city, and he's extremely articulate. So he said, our fortunate geography of being in the right place at the right time, with some good technology companies establishing themselves and ready to go, there was a lot of luck involved. He said, we also made the necessary tough cuts we needed to make, but those we knew we needed to make before the election was over and before these tough times hit us. And he was very frank about not being directly responsible for this, but being in a place where this was going to be handled in a good way, and that the state and the city was going to march on. One thing he said that was fortunate about Salt Lake City in this time is that the state, as many of you know, is heavily influenced, to put it mildly, by one particular church, the Mormon Church. And the Mormon Church established Utah as what's called a theocracy. And that is that it's going to be a state that's going to be heavily influenced by a religion. And by doing that, they did not then have to go through the process of what Ralph calls spreading the political bounty around. They said, we are establishing Utah. Salt Lake's going to be our capital. It's going to be our center of commerce, our center of faith, our center of transportation. And it's going to be the dominant force in civilizing the state of Utah. And so there wasn't any, well, let's give the capital to Springfield, and let's give the railroads to Chicago, and let's give something else to another city. It was a very well-defined point of leadership, and I thought that was an interesting perspective on his part. I also asked him, we hear people say, why doesn't government run itself more like a business? And I wanted to flip-flop that around because things are going so well in Salt Lake City. I said, what is it about running a government that business could learn from a well-run government? And he very thoughtfully said, I think that a government is forced to include more people in its deliberations, in its decision-making. And this inclusion factor is so important and could be used so much better by businesses if we would include employees at all levels in decisions and speculations and looking at the future. And Ralph is what I would call a true convener. He has established and strengthened a series of neighborhood councils and advisory boards and committees and has done a lot of scenario building for what happens good and what happens bad in a city. And he said, so what I think businesses could learn from a well-run government is that you need to include people inside and outside the organization to assist you with making decisions. And I found that to be an interesting take on leadership in that situation. One of his big themes, and it was during his campaign, is something called open government. And I said, well, what exactly does that mean? He said, well, open government is a two-way street. Is number one, it means that we are going to involve citizens at every level in both the decisions and the policies that we make as we move this city forward, as we create a vision for the great American city. He said, now I think everybody understands that, and that's sort of like government in the sunshine in Florida, and it's very inclusive. He said, but what we're doing a little differently is that we are infusing our employees inside the organization with being more transparent, with being more team-oriented, with being, I think, more openly honest about what's going on in government. Literally call it, we have nothing and will not hide anything. We have nothing to hide and we will not hide anything. So open government, he believes, means open doors and includes people both inside and outside the government of Salt Lake City. It is an energizing, an inclusive, a facilitative style of government. He feels that this open government helps people know what's going on, and that citizen input can only improve how government works and how effective it is. I also asked him about what's the top priority, compelling goal for the city for the next 12 months. And this brought on a conversation that was very educational to me. There are several cities, including the one that we live in here in Gainesville, Florida, that claim that they are building a sustainable environment or sustainable community. And I don't think I realized what this meant until I had this conversation with Ralph. And here are some of his ideas about a sustainable community. For most of us, we think, well, that means, wow, a recycling system, walking or biking to work a little bit more, less solid waste, some things like that. And that certainly is part of it. But what it means to Salt Lake City at this point in time is the increase of urban farming, for instance, is a huge, I think, initiative that the city is going through. And they don't really care whether you have your urban farm in your front yard or in your backyard. And I know many communities, some here in Gainesville, that certainly would not go for that. It has to do with the way we use energy of all kinds and encouraging people with both financial incentives and simply with encouragement to buy appliances or to change over to systems in their homes and businesses that are energy efficient, much more energy efficient. Transportation is a major key to sustainability, and it says that we must be able to get from point A to point B in an urban area without a huge carbon footprint caused by one person in one car making one trip every day. And so there must be a system of transportation. In Salt Lake City, there is currently a light rail that will eventually take you from the airport to downtown, to the university, to the southern part of the valley where the most of the population is. I also know that there is a plan for an internal streetcar system in Salt Lake City that links up the light rail. So there will be a comprehensive, energy-efficient transportation system. There is water usage also. The increase in using reclaimed water, and simply the fact that we can't use water the way that we grew up using it here as Americans. Some things are going to have to change. And then he also talked lastly about air quality and about some changes that will have to be made in the way that we use fossil fuels and our emissions from everything that emits anything. where this differs from talking about sustainability in a community is that Mayor Becker has just this last week taken a comprehensive package of sustainability policies to the City Council. And the City Council has approved those by a majority vote, but not without a great deal of debate that will continue on through some community forums. So my question to Ralph was, why would anyone be against this? Why would anyone be against a sustainable society and community that is more efficient, more effective, more environmentally sensitive, easy to get around in? And he said, change is hard. He said, as a matter of fact, I ran into one of my great supporters the other day who sort of took me by the collar and said, Ralph, you're going to tell me when and how much I can water my lawn? Who made you Pope? And what he meant by this is that change is extremely hard, whether it's the way we water our grass, how we get back and forth to work, the temperature in our buildings. Every part of sustainability is a change for most of us. And he is willing to push this and believes that it will be the only way that we will change the old paradigm of energy use and transportation and neighborhoods and connectivity and inclusiveness to a sustainable city. The last question I had for him was, how do you feel about just missing some of these lists of best cities to do blank in? And Salt Lake City seems to be off the radar. Number one, it's not a huge city. Some people look at it and they say, wow, there's about 2 million people in Salt Lake City. That's not true. There are about 2 million people in the 3 counties that make up Salt Lake City Valley, or Salt Lake Valley. Salt Lake City itself is a relatively small town of about 100,000 people. Some of the mythology about it is interesting. Number one, since the last census, we've discovered that Salt Lake City is not majority Mormon. It is 49% Mormon and 51% everybody else. His answer to this, with kind of a laugh, was lists are very subjective. They may have a set of criteria, and we're not always going to hit those to make it the list of best places to live. And by the way, the Provo, Orem, Salt Lake City, Ogden areas have always been on the best places to live list. He said, but what we're going to do is to be a great American city. And we're going to work on everything we think makes it that way. Sustainability, transportation, livability, cost of living, medical facilities, recreation, and the full use of our fortunate geography. So it was a great interview, and I hope that you can learn something for your own community through the interview that I had with Mayor Ralph Becker of Salt Lake City. And I truly believe that he is well on his way to leading that city, with the help of a lot of people, into being one of America's great cities. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time on Leading Ideas.